Hey, what's going on guys? Arekkz here, welcome back to another video for Marvel's Avengers, and today I want to give you a chance to take a look at the abilities for the characters in the beta. Now if you guys have seen any of our coverage up until this point, you will know that each of the playable heroes should have 3 different skill pages. For the purpose of the beta, we only have access to their primary page. So with that in mind, we've only really seen like a third of what these characters have to offer. I don't know whether the other 2 pages are just as extensive. I do get the impression that one of the pages is slightly more passive stuff, so it might not be as impactful, but regardless, this is not everything for the characters, but this is a look at what they can do. You know, when you play through the beta, you can get up to level 15, you can get to power level 45, you can unlock quite a few things in the skill tree, so I thought we'd take a quick scan through, look at the abilities, and I'm going to jump over to the harm rooms to kind of show off some of those moves as well. So if you guys do enjoy this, then a like would be super appreciated. I want to give a massive shout out to Square Enix for very kindly giving us beta access to the game. If you guys are excited for this, or you just want to know more about the game, then make sure you stick around, because we will be doing some more coverage to try and, you know, paint a better picture as to what this game has to offer. Now, for the purpose of the beta, you can play as 4 characters, again, ignoring the kind of beginning bridge scene where you get to try Thor and Cap. Outside of that point, you can only play as Hulk, Widow, Kamala Khan, and Iron Man, so they are the characters we'll focus on for now. So, starting off with Hulk, in your primary tree, you have your pummel ability, which is basically just your bog standard bread and butter combo. This is what you'll use to wail on enemies a large chunk of the time. Of course, following on from there, you then have the green bomber, which allows you to do a combo in the air instead. So if you want to take out some enemies, which is kind of useful because there are some annoying flying enemies later, so being able to just do more than just jump up and hit once is actually quite handy. And of course, following on from there, you then have the cannonball, and this is where I was kind of talking about with the skills before. It seems like a lot of the skills in this game, as opposed to just selecting a different skill completely and kind of swapping out your primary specials and things like that, instead, a lot of the skills that you invest in simply branch from base skill tree options, and they then add either further abilities, further kind of permutations, or more combo strings. So that's kind of what happens here. Cannonball is your ability to just simply hold down L2, press R2, and bring something out the ground, which of course allows you to throw things. Meanwhile, when you upgrade that, you can upgrade that into Meteor, where you can grab a giant boulder out of the ground, which is huge, of course knocks back enemies. And you then have Shatter Spin, where, you know, prior to that, if you don't have this unlocked, you can simply just throw them. That's all you can do. Meanwhile, if you go and unlock this, you can then go and spin it around and use it up close and personal, which is also pretty powerful. You then have Monstrous Swipe, where after dodging, you can then backhand enemies. I didn't get a chance to unlock this one because I didn't have enough skill points. And you then have Battering Ram, where basically when you sprint towards an enemy, you can shoulder charge them. Incredibly useful. After playing Ghost of Tsushima, I just really wanted this move because you have a similar thing in there. And of course, you can then upgrade that to Ram Reinforcement, which creates a small radial explosion on impact to basically hit multiple targets. Jumping over to your second section, you have Gamma Hammer, where basically when you press triangle and you execute a heavy attack, you can then continue to press triangle to basically slam the ground, one of kind of Hulk's iconic moves. You then have Smash, which is your charge attack, your charge heavy, which basically slams down, smashes the ground, great for breaking through shields. That then goes into Aftershock, where after a power attack you can press triangle again to perform another massive radial attack. And that then goes on to the final one, which is Tectonic Fury, which basically allows you to wail on the ground and just dish out a load of kind of AoE damage, great for kind of attacking enemies in a group. Of course, outside of that, you have Unsteady Ground, allowing you to basically just sprint forward and body slam on the ground, which is good for knocking back targets. And you have the Heavy Combo Finisher, where you can end your regular combo with what's basically a golf swing to send enemies flying. You have Skyfall, which basically allows you to perform a falling charge attack, which is incredibly powerful, again really good at mixing up, especially on like boss characters. And you can then upgrade that to Air Spike, which basically knocks down enemies when you land. On top of that, you then have Power Spike, where basically when you grab enemies, which of course you can do as Hulk, which is incredibly cool, you can then use triangle to slam them onto the ground, which is kind of painful, but also really cool. You have Bludgeon, which simply allows you to just combo with those enemies. So yeah, you can use that to basically beat enemies with their friends. And you have Air Spike, where if you jump in the air, you can then slam down with the enemy that you're holding. Alternatively, you have Smackdown, where when you're holding enemy, you can now grab a second enemy and you can basically combo them together and swing them around, flailing left and right. You have Gamma Crusher, which basically allows you to hold down triangle to slam them together, destroying them and also kicking out a shockwave. And you have the Aerial Gamma Crusher, basically same thing, just in the air. And then finally, the Elemental Grab Damage, where when attacking with enemies, attacks will deal status damage based on the type of enemy that you have grabbed, which is actually pretty handy. And then your final tree basically leans into your rage ability. Your rage is effectively your meter that builds up as you play. Then whenever you hold down right trigger, you can increase your damage and you can reduce the damage taken. It's kind of like your heavy tanky stance. And of course, when you look through the tree, this is basically ways to expand and kind of build on this. You have options to help you increase meter whenever you're performing things like perfect dodges. Other options are things like reduces the cost of rage. And you even have things that further increase the intrinsic value of that meter. So all of this basically leads into your special unique meter. So that is effectively Hulk. You can see some of the gameplay in the background of him in the harm room, basically just going crazy with his moves. He's a lot of fun, and honestly, while I am definitely a Thor fanboy, given that I can't play as him in the beta, Hulk is 100% one of the cooler characters to play as. He is just crazy, he's powerful, he's a lot of fun. Moving over from there to talk about Black Widow. Of course, she has martial arts, so this is very much your primary combo. Again, the kind of first trees will always link, largely speaking, into your basic combo attacks. So martial art is your bread and butter. You have Pounce, which when you're in midair allows you to perform a diving kick. You then have the extension to martial art, which is Spider Sweep, which is basically a sweeping kick, which is actually pretty good to kind of make enemies vulnerable, especially if they have things like shields. Cyclone Kick allows you to unlock the Whirling Kick. And then finally, the Splinter Kick is another kick that basically spins around and leaves enemies vulnerable. Anytime the enemy is in a vulnerable state, it basically just kind of opens them up for further attacks. Meanwhile, for Widow, when you switch over to her heavier attacks, this is the ones that use her batons. So of course, Nightstick is your standard bread and butter heavy combo. Spinning Fury can be performed to basically knock enemies down to the ground. It's like a spinning whirling attack with your batons. You then have Night Watch, which is the extension on that, where when you're in the air, you can then perform a heavy slam that basically kind of slams down and knocks enemies back, which is really, really useful. You have an Impact Grenade, which you can throw simply by holding triangle to stun nearby enemies. You have the Back Alley Gambit, where when you press triangle after dodging, you perform a baton slam with a large reach. You have Baton Strike, which basically allows you to add a heavy hit to the end of your regular light combo. And you then have the Madripoor Special, where when you press triangle while sprinting, you perform a powerful kick that sends enemies reeling. You then, for Widow, have some options for her pistols, because of course she has her melee attacks, her baton attacks, and then her pistols. So your regular stuff, just simply by holding down L2 and R2, you can fire your pistols. But you can then go down and change that to Bullet Storm, where if you hold it down, you can basically release a high charge burst of bullets. And if you go further down to Ammo Overload, this increases the ammo capacity of the pistol magazine by 4 rounds. Alternatively, this is where some of the kind of customization for the gun comes in. If you go left, you have full auto shot. And keep in mind, once you start inspecting into these, you can swap between the different types of shot modes. But for this one, as it suggests, this is your full auto fire, so larger magazines, rapid fire, that kind of thing. Basically like Uzis. You then have Rainmaker, which increase the magazine size for the full auto shot, and that then goes down into stun rounds, which increase the stun damage dealt by full auto shots. Meanwhile, on the right side of the tree, you have the high caliber shot, which is kind of more akin to like a sniper, if you will, and it has a lot of kind of stopping power. This can go into the perforator, where when using the high caliber rounds, you can charge up an ionized projectile that pierces through targets, really good for shielded enemies. And you then have the expansion there to extend the clip, and of course the polygonal rifling, which increases critical attack damage dealt by a high caliber shot. And then finally, some of her utility stuff. You have Widow's Line, which is really, really useful for kind of traversing the environment, allows you to basically just grapple and swing between things. And this can be upgraded into the Power Line, where when using Widow's Line to launch off of ledges and poles, this basically allows you to travel quicker and greater distances. You also have Widow's Line, which can be used as a defensive ability, where you can press right trigger to kind of zip quickly towards enemies. This can be upgraded into Widow's Sting, where just before an incoming attack lands, if you use the Widow's Line, you can successfully parry the incoming attack, avoiding damage, and then sending out a forceful explosion that hits the enemies in a large radius. And then finally, you also have the Whiplash, where again, after pressing right trigger to parry an incoming attack, you can then quickly press triangle to execute a counter attack, like an acrobatic chokehold, which is pretty powerful for nearby enemies. And then you have your bog standard dodge. Of course, Black Widow is very mobile, and you can of course then use the operative's feint, where if you hold down circle when you are near an enemy, you can then vault over the target, which then allows you to basically get behind them if they've got things like shields. Again, very useful. Next up the list, we have Kamala Khan, again broken down into her light attacks, heavy attacks, specials, things like that. So under her light attack, you have her Fly Swatter, bread and butter combo. Of course, you also have Flying Fists, where when you're in midair, you could of course continue your combo airborne. This can then be extended into Double Down Kick, where if you hold square whilst in midair, you basically break through enemy guard with 2 downward kicks, which is pretty powerful. Of course, you can also upgrade your basic attack with Whirling Wallop, again by holding down square to leap upwards whilst unleashing a flurry of uppercut swings that again will launch enemies into the air. Good for juggling, especially given that Kamala has lots of airborne attacks. That's actually pretty useful. You have Spin Kick, which is a light sprint attack. You can basically press square whilst running to perform a spin kick. And you then also have Leg Sweep, where when you're dodging, you can press square to perform a far-reaching sweep that trips up all nearby enemies that aren't attacking or blocking. So pretty handy. After that, you then have your secondary, which basically leans more so into your heavy attacks. Spinning Heel Strike allows you to add a heavy attack at the end of your regular bread and butter combo. So again, we've seen this for other characters. Basically just perform your regular light combo, end it with a heavy attack, and this one will now perform a heavy combo finisher that inflicts stun damage. You also have Sliding Kick, where if you press triangle while sprinting, you'll instead go into a slide kick, which can basically trip up enemies. And you can then go into Rubber Band Bash, where if you press triangle whilst dodging, you can launch forward with a powerful shoulder charge that knocks enemies off balance and to the ground. Down the middle, of course, your regular triangle, your regular kind of heavy attack. Of course, this can then be upgraded into the Double Barrel Punch, where if you hold down triangle, you can charge up a powerful double punch that will break through enemy defenses and deals a lot more stun damage. And of course, you have Catapult Kick, where if you press triangle after performing the Battering Ram, you can then kick forward and launch enemies away. You have the Hammering Strike, where if you press triangle whilst in midair, you can again perform your regular heavy attack. This can then go down into Hammer Fist, where if you hold down triangle whilst in midair, you can basically perform a powerful punch that breaks through enemy defenses. You have the Fist of Justice, which extends your airborne combo and of course dishes out more stun damage in the process. And you then have the Iron Spike, where if you press triangle an additional time at the end of the nail gun combo to perform a heavy combo finisher, that will then dive towards the enemy with a giant fist, slamming into them with extreme force, and the finisher can then be performed at any point in the combo by holding triangle. Moving on from there, you then have what is effectively her ranged options. You have Whip Fist, where you can hold down L2 and R2 to basically fire your fist, kind of like Luffy's Gum Gum Punch, that sort of thing. But you then have Harpoon, where if you hold down R2 during the Whip Fist attack, you can instead hold standard sized enemies. Keep in mind, you can't use this on giant ones, but you can hold standard enemies. So of course you can then use them and then you can drag them around to hit into other enemies. You have the Crushing Grasp, where if you've then picked up an enemy, you can then press square to squeeze that enemy, dealing constant damage. You have the Nutcracker, where if you're holding onto a grabbed enemy, you can press triangle to reel them in and slam them into the ground. That then goes into Aerial Spike, where if you are holding a grabbed enemy whilst you're in midair, you can then slam them on the ground. And of course, you then have Panic Button, where when you're slamming enemies, it creates a radial pulse of damage based on the type of enemy that's being slammed. Enemies with special damage types will also inflict status damage, which is kind of cool. Plus, you also have Grip Strength to basically reduce the amount of intrinsic energy that is drained whilst you're holding enemies. Again, that's your kind of bar at the top of the screen. Finally, down the last tree, you have your Polymorph, which is the other thing that will dip into your primary meter. When you hold down R2, you can bend and twist out of the way of basic attacks. You can then go into Hip Check, where if you press R2 just before an attack, you can dodge and parry, and this one rather interestingly can be used even if your intrinsic meter is depleted. Morningstar is basically a follow-up. If you parry an attack, you can press square to immediately follow up with an attack that pushes enemies away. Meanwhile, the Palm Strike is a heavier hit, again following a parry attack to basically trigger a high stun damage attack that basically breaks through enemy defenses and can slam enemies into the ground. Alternatively, using Whirlwind whilst your Polymorph is active, if you hold down square, you can basically spin around, dealing effectively large AoE damage to enemy enemies that are nearby. You have the Seismic Slam, where if Polymorph is active and you hold down triangle instead, you will crash down to the ground, creating a large shockwave that launches all nearby enemies. And of course, you can expand the main tree. Shining will of course regenerate willpower by 4% per second when Polymorph is active. And the final one, No Surrender, reduces the intrinsic cost for Whirlwind by 60% and reduces the intrinsic cost for Seismic Slam by 25%. Then finally, turning our attention to Iron Man. So Iron Man, again, first tree, your basic light attacks. It's your bread and butter combo. The Iron Gauntlet can then be upgraded to the Thruster Uppercut. If you hold down square, you can then perform a Thruster Assisted Uppercut that breaks block and launches enemies into the air, which is especially useful for Iron Man because of course you can juggle them and you've got a lot of aerial options. You then have your Aerial Assault, which basically brings your bread and butter combo into the air. That then goes into the Power Dive, where if you hold square whilst in midair, you'll dive down, slamming airborne enemies down to the ground and staggering nearby enemies on impact. And this then goes down into Dive Amplifier, which increases the impact stun damage and the reaction severity of Power Dive. Also, the area effect is also increased as a result. The second tree, of course, you have your Repulsor Shot, which allows you to fire your repulsor at enemies from afar. You have your hand cannon, which is basically your regular heavy attack. This one, instead of using your fist, you'll actually be using your hand cannons to fire enemies in kind of this really cool combo. Very sort of Iron Man-esque in that respect. Power Blast allows you to upgrade your repulsor to allow you to do a charge attack, which can then break through enemy guard. You then have Power Pulse, which basically allows you to upgrade your repulsor so you can just hold down triangle to auto-target nearby enemies. You have the Muon Shotgun, which is a slight kind of augmentation to your repulsor. Basically pressing triangle while sprinting allows you to auto-target and fire dual repulsors that effectively act like a shotgun. You basically just push enemies back, but this does drain your supercharge energy. You then also have the Repulsor Strike, which adds a heavy attack at the end of your regular bread and butter combo, your light attack. And you then have the Slingshot, where if you press triangle whilst dodging to perform an evasive spin, that will then quickly fire back-to-back repulsor blasts towards the targeted enemy. After that, we then have some more stuff that specs into your range aspects, and this, in a very similar manner to Widow, allows you to switch between laser types using the D-pad. So for this one, you have Laser Beam, which is a ranged attack where you can hold down L2 and then hold R2 to fire a focused laser. You then have Energy Lance, where with the lasers equipped, you can instead hold down L2 and R2 to power up the laser, allowing your beam to pierce through enemy targets and deal additional damage. You have Burning Edge, which is a really cool move. Definitely recommend this one for Iron Man players. This, basically, if you press triangle while dodging, will slide forward and perform 2 large laser swipes, staggering all enemies in a wide area. Incredibly good if you are surrounded. You then have the Photon Samurai, which instead allows you to, with lasers equipped, you can press triangle to activate a sweeping beam that cuts through enemies, and you can then rapidly press triangle to combo a series of heavy attacks. Or you have the Laser Scythe, where if you're airborne, you can instead press triangle to swipe enemies from below using your lasers. The upgrade in the Samurai is Whirling Tempest, where with the lasers equipped, you hold down triangle to slice through surrounding enemies with the spinning dual beam attack. And then further to that, you then have the Laser Strike, which allows you to add a heavy combo finisher again to your basic bread and butter combo. Magnetron, we didn't unlock this one, but with the laser equipped, you hold down triangle while in midair to unleash both lasers simultaneously, firing a forward-facing double beam that knocks enemies away. However, if you want to switch to rockets, again, you can use this on the D-pad, you can switch between laser and rockets. Instead, you can then, have your micro rockets, which you can then fire, and these are high damage rockets. Also, whilst flying, you can wait for the reticle to auto-target an enemy, and you can simply hold down R2 to lock onto up to 4 targets, and then release this to fire missiles at all locked targets. You have the Scorched Earth attack, which is a heavy attack with rockets, where you press triangle to quickly fire a powerful attack at the most direct targets. Smart rockets, of course, if you hold down L2 to aim and then hold down R2 to lock onto targets, once targets have then been locked on, releasing R2 will then fire out a load of smart rockets. You then have the Javelin, where with the rockets equipped, you can hold down triangle to fire sticky rockets that attach to nearby enemies and detonate after a short delay. The longer the button is held, the more rockets are fired. You have the Rocket Strike, which again will add a rocket heavy combo finisher to the end of your regular bread and butter combo. And you have the Counterfire, where if you press triangle while dodging backwards, you fire a pair of homing rockets towards nearby enemies. So, as you can see, Iron Man has a lot of options. He, of course, has his lasers, he has his rockets, you can switch between them. He, of course, has airborne options, and of course, he has grounded options. He's definitely the tech-focused character. But for the time being, that's it. That was a quick look at the abilities for the characters. If you want to take a deeper look at the gameplay, tomorrow I'll just be uploading some more gameplay of basically just all these 4 characters, some kind of high-level gameplay once we are all effectively level 15. So if you want to sort of see some of these in more action, then definitely stick around for that. That'll be on the channel tomorrow. But for the time being, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Any questions, drop them in the comments down below, and of course, keep it locked for plenty more. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that video. Don't forget, if you haven't already done so, you can join the Arekkz Gaming Discord. We've got an awesome community over there with so many different channels for you to chat loads of different topics and different games. I'm in there, the team's in there. If you guys want to chat with us, find people to play with, it's just in general a great place to be. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to turn on those notifications so you don't miss any of our future uploads.